welcome back to the Skill Sessions pod. I'm Hayley, your host for the next 30 minutes. I can't have done too bad in the last episode because we are back for episode 2. What am I doing here? Well, this podcast is your backstage pass to some of the best moments from our live skill session webinars. If you haven't taken a listen to the first episode, The Realities of Dyslexia in the Workplace, then go check that out once we are finished today. A quick reminder of the source for today's information. What are skill sessions? Every month we bring you experts and incredible guest speakers who share their knowledge and real life experiences of different disabilities and neurodiversities. These online events are hosted by CareScribe. They're dedicated to fostering learning, growth, and a more inclusive world for professionals like you. Whether you are catching up on any of our sessions in the past 2 years, or you are only just discovering skill sessions for the first time, I have got so much to share with you over the next half an hour. Please do come and join the next webinar. We now have a community of more than 2,000 like-minded individuals, and you can find out more by heading over to the event page of the CareScribe website to see what's coming up next. If you have not been graced with my presence before, then hello and welcome. As I said, I am Hayley. I am part of the marketing team here at CareScribe, and this is my latest project, a podcast. I'm back for episode 2, so it cannot have gone too badly the first time round. This is a different brain, a different perspective. Don't forget to join the conversation on LinkedIn if you are giving me a listen. I would really love to hear from you. Today, I am going back to one of my first ever sessions at CareScribe. And it was such a thought-provoking one, Reframing Neurodiversity for Mental Health. In that session, we welcomed neurodiversity and inclusion expert Jess Meredith. The relationship between neurodivergence and mental health is complex, and during the live webinar, which you can catch in full on our past event page, which is linked in the description, Jess shared captivating stats and her personal story that we will hear a little bit more of shortly. Jess is the founder and CEO of Differing Minds, offering neurodiversity training which is engaging and impactful. Differing Minds offers bespoke, individualised support for neurodivergent people and their managers, providing all the tools you need to create a neuroinclusive culture and enable thriving neurodivergent colleagues. With that, grab yourself a cuppa and use me as an excuse to get yourself a biscuit because it is time for us to get stuck in. Here's a fact that won't come as a surprise. No two brains are the same. It's like a fingerprint but with way more processing power and for some of us, occasional buffering issues. Every person you meet has a completely unique brain, shaped by their individual experiences, environments, and even how they process the world around them. Jess put it so simply in her webinar, neurodiversity literally means the diversity of our brains. As long as you aren't in a room on your own, then that room is neurodiverse. Now, what do I mean by we are all different? For example, whilst some might savour the sound of rain, others could hear it as background noise. Here's Jess summing it up perfectly in her webinar, and here is how she describes the diversity of our brains.
Now, we love categories as a society. I love categories. So it's useful to categorise into 2 groups, kind of within the umbrella that everybody exists under. And you would say that those that exist in the kind of neuro-majority, so for the majority of us, whilst all of our brains are different, they largely are the same. They fundamentally see the world and experience the world in a similar way. When you think specifically about some of these differences, so executive functioning, social interaction, sensory processing, communication, information processing, attention, there is more. Those that sit within the neuromajority experience these things and experience the world in similar ways. But we have a smaller group of people whose brains are more fundamentally different. So again, we're all unique, but there are some people within the population, of which I am one, whose brains are more fundamentally different. And we experience the world in quite a significantly different way to the majority of people.
So now that we've established that every brain is unique, Let's talk about why that's such an asset to a workplace. Diversity is like the team bake-off. You get a little bit of everything and then suddenly the whole table just looks delicious. Neurodiverse teams bring fresh perspectives, solving problems in ways that others might have never imagined. The Ultimate Guide to Neurodiversity in the Workplace highlights these benefits, showing that embracing diversity is as much a strategic advantage as it is an ethical imperative. However, as Jess points out, language matters. Similarly to these different brains, there are various terms to describe neurodiversity. Some say neurospicy, which you can read more about in one of our blogs that I should have linked in the bio. Some say neurosparkly, which is one of my personal favourites. And others prefer terms like neurodistinct. Here's Jess sharing a perspective on terminology.
And it's really vital that we all respect an individual's preference in terms of terminology. And understanding that has a really significant impact actually on somebody's mental health.
So the key is respecting an individual's choice, because how someone refers to their condition is so deeply personal, and respecting those choices is like pronouncing someone's name correctly. It's a basic decency. Think about how you would feel if you had met someone and you introduced yourself. Hello, I'm Hayley. It's nice to meet you. And then they continuously called you the wrong name. Hallie? Holly? Kaylee? Emma? No, I told you I'm Hayley. Maybe you'll correct them a couple of times. Maybe you won't. But getting someone's name wrong happens all the time. But when it keeps happening, it starts to get dismissive, right? But now imagine feeling that kind of misunderstanding on a deeper level about how you think, process your emotions, and interact with the world. For neurodivergent people, it is not just frustrating, but it can be isolating. When neurodivergent individuals feel misunderstood, it can lead to them shutting down or masking their true selves to avoid being the odd one out, which, again, we'll explore later. But this misunderstanding doesn't just impact productivity, it directly affects their mental health. Here's Jess with some sobering stats on how being misunderstood can impact your mental health. And I am going to interject with a really quick trigger warning here. Some of these statistics are really hard to hear. And while I have filtered a few out that you can find in the full webinar on the website, the ones that I am going to share can still be really hard to hear. Feel free to jump a few minutes ahead or take a break, go and grab yourself another biscuit, and just come back when you're ready.
So some difficult things to talk about. We know through research and through people's lived experience that neurodivergent people have poorer physical and mental health outcomes than their neurotypical peers. So not only is this about mental health difficulties, which forms the basis for most of this session, but they also have a higher prevalence in terms of physical health difficulties too. And sometimes those things can be interlinked, which you'll understand a little bit more as I go on to talk a bit more about my story. We know that autistic people are likely to die 16 to 30 years sooner than their age and gender matched peers, their allistic peers, so their non-autistic peers. As the parent of an autistic child, that is such a difficult thing for me to hear and understand, but it's the reality of the situation. 30 years younger is such a huge amount. And obviously this doesn't exist for every single autistic person, but this just shows the difference in the outcomes for autistic people versus allistic people. And we know that neurodivergent people experience higher levels of isolation and loneliness. And when you feel isolated socially and from the community, and you experience that extreme level of loneliness, that obviously has a significant impact on your mental health.
Getting a diagnosis can feel like opening Pandora's box, or getting a code in an escape room but not knowing which lock it unlocks. Sometimes it's exactly what you need, and other times it leaves you with more questions than answers. For some, like Jess, it brought clarity and validation, a sense of finally understanding themselves. For others, it can feel limiting, attaching a label that reinforces negative societal connotations. My mental health journey has been a long and windy one, and if I'm honest, it's been such a roller coaster, and I'm not entirely sure I'm any closer to getting off. As someone who recently began exploring my own neurodivergence, I've experienced both excitement and apprehension for seeking a formal diagnosis. I am just starting a diagnostic journey, and so far it has been like realizing that I've been playing the game of life on hard mode without knowing that there was an easier option. For me specifically, the challenges that my brain perceives are part of my nuances, making the diagnosis process its own problem. Celebrities like Simone Biles and Emma Watson have been open about their neurodivergence, showing how understanding yourself can be so empowering. Jess's story about her diagnosis is particularly insightful, and I'm going to share it with you. Have a listen.
But what we didn't know back then, and I didn't find out until years later, is that I have ADHD. So as a 10-year-old, I was experiencing the world in a completely different way to the majority of my peers. But I didn't know that about myself. Other people didn't know it about me. So it was having this really, really big impact. What was going on in my mind was so complex to me, so busy to me. I couldn't distinguish from what I really needed to focus on because I had too much going on in my mind. And I have a real difficulty with the term ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Not only does it have a double negative, but the deficit part of attention doesn't resonate with me at all. The way I see it is I have dynamic attention. I have so much attention to so many different things. What I find difficult is distinguishing what's relevant information for me at any given moment in time from irrelevant information. So in the context of work, I might be being asked to do something, and I know that's what I need to do, but I've got too much going on in my brain, so I almost physically can't do what I know I need to do. So all of that going on for me as a 10-year-old child, but not understanding that other people weren't experiencing this, was leading to some real difficulties.
As we heard, one of the challenges is that outdated language is still used to describe these conditions. Why do so many of them sound like the title of a bad horror movie? There's deficit, disorder, they're all double negatives. Naming conditions with double negatives is like calling a torch a darkness deficit device. Yeah, sure, it's technically accurate, but wouldn't you rather just call it a torch? What about if we called a rainbow a chaos of colour instead? I don't think that has the same ring. By shifting the language, we shift perception. Highlighting strengths, differences and possibilities rather than just focusing on limitations. Let's take Jess's example, ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Jess prefers dynamic attention, and honestly, I am with her. Attention deficit makes it sound like you've lost your keys and you can't find your attention anywhere. Hyperactivity implies that you are a toddler bouncing off the walls no matter what your age. Your attention isn't missing, it's varied. Sometimes you're laser focused and other times you have just stormed ahead to the next exciting thing before somebody else. The term obsessive compulsive gets boiled down to stereotypes about excessive cleaning or being rigidly organised. It's ignoring the nuance. I'd say it's more like high resolution thinking. People with OCD might see 1,000 details that others have missed. It's like being a human enhance button on a murder mystery. Sure, it could get a bit overwhelming, but it can also be so powerful in the right setting. Disorder alone carries heavy negative connotations. Implying that something is broken or wrong, it literally suggests that things are out of order. Jess made an excellent point. These labels impact mental health by perpetuating the stigma and shame, even when the traits themselves can be strengths. Jess expanded on why the labels matter so much for mental health, and let's have a listen.
So, firstly, we have so many social expectations or social norms that work for neurotypical people that are quite easy for neurotypical people to understand, and it's not so easy for neurodivergent people. So when you know that these norms exist, as a neurodivergent person, you can almost sort of go down two paths. There's more, but in a binary way, let's think about these kind of two paths. One path is, well, I'm not going to meet these social expectations and these social norms, maybe through choice, because I don't want to. I want to do things my way, or maybe because I can't. My needs are just so much that I need to just be me in this society. What that can lead to is people not understanding you, thinking that you are odd, wrong, different, not necessarily in a good way. The other path is the path that I took, which was, I'm going to try and fit in. I'm going to cover up who I am. I'm going to try and learn these social expectations and norms through copying people and through watching what other people are doing. And I'm going to change a lot about myself. I'm going to mask or suppress my neurodivergent traits in order to fit in.
For those of you who have ever worked in retail or hospitality or the customer service industry, masking is like wearing your customer service voice all day, every day. Have you ever felt the need to put on a brave face or act differently to fit in? For neurodivergent individuals, this behaviour is known as masking, and it's often a survival mechanism. It can be so exhausting, and I will be honest, I have always masked, but I just didn't know that that was what I was doing. Hayley at work is different to Hayley at home. And she's different again from the Hayley that's with my mum's side of the family and the Hayley that's with my dad's side of the family. These different Hayleys will rarely ever cross paths because for me, that just feels really odd. Now, if you are neurotypical, consider this. Have you ever felt so drained after a long day of socialising or maybe just back-to-back meetings all day? Imagine that exhaustion in your daily life because you are constantly having to hide who you actually are. Imagine if we could just be ourselves with everyone without feeling different, standing out, or feeling misunderstood. When people feel accepted, their confidence goes up. They're more engaged and their creativity really shines. It is not just nice, but it is smart for businesses too. While masking might help someone blend in, it comes at a cost. Over time, it can lead to exhaustion, burnout, worsening mental health as a result. I mentioned earlier about the diagnostic process, and I'm still trying to figure out exactly what's going on in my brain and how I'm supposed to move forward. But I'm going to loop back to that for a second with what Jess had to say about the diagnostic process.
And then there's a lot of bias in our systems relating to diagnosis, a lot of bias that exists, unfortunately, still in the diagnostic criteria because of biased research. And generally, diagnosis is quite inaccessible for a lot of people. So not only is it inaccessible because of the bias, but it's inaccessible because of the huge wait times we have on the NHS at the moment. And also, a lot of people don't have access to a private diagnosis. So having those barriers and then not being able to understand yourself, whether it's because you don't even realize you're neurodivergent yourself in the first place, or perhaps it's that you do think you are, but you can't get that can't get it on paper, you can't get that recognition. And for some people, that is really needed. For me, having an ADHD diagnosis, I've always said this was one of the most liberating experiences of my life, because without that, and without the confirmation of somebody else that what I was experiencing was true almost, can be very, very difficult to deal with.
It is so great to hear how reassuring Jess's diagnosis was for her. And as we've alluded, that isn't the experience for everyone. I recently came across a story that I really want to share with you. A professional in her mid-30s, let's call her Hannah, had long suspected that she was neurodivergent. After years of struggling with sensory sensitivities and difficulty focusing, she finally decides to go and get assessed. Hannah's diagnosis confirms that she has ADHD. Initially, she feels validated. It was like the puzzle pieces of her life were finally fitting together. But when she shared the news with her manager, things took a turn. Instead of being met with support or even curiosity, Hannah's manager dismissed her concerns, saying, "Everyone has trouble focusing sometimes. Are you sure you're not just overthinking?" Worse, she noticed that after her manager started to micromanage her tasks, as if the diagnosis somehow made her less capable to do her job. She was left feeling isolated, ashamed. Instead of empowering her, this diagnosis became a burden because of the way that other people had responded. She started to second guess herself, wondering if she should have just kept quiet. And unfortunately, this experience is not uncommon. Many neurodivergent individuals worry about facing judgment or stigma when they come forward, whether that could be from a colleague, family, even healthcare professionals. Here's Jess sharing her perspective on how workplaces can just do better.
So for those that aren't aware of it, the social model of disability is a model that is kind of being pushed by the disabled community at the moment. And it's different from the more traditional model, which is the medical model of disability. So under the medical model of disability, you would say that someone is disabled as a result of their impairment. So if you take a wheelchair user as an example, because it's easier for us to visualize with a visible difference, under the medical model, you would say that person is disabled as a result of their not having legs, their back being broken, their legs not working, whatever it might be that their impairment is. But under the social model of disability, we say that someone is disabled as a result of their environment. So again, if you take a wheelchair user as an example, under the social model of disability, that person is disabled as a result of a lack of access. So it's relating to their environment. So that person is disabled under the social model by a lack of lifts, a lack of ramps, a lack of whatever it is that's stopping them from accessing the community or the workplace or whatever it might be that non-wheelchair users can access. And it's really, this move towards the social model is really important because not only is it a more positive framing around disability and around neurodivergence, but it also takes the onus away from the individual to need to change something about themselves, which often they can't. And it puts the onus on society or on workplaces or on whatever environment it might be to accommodate and to make it accessible for everybody.
The social model of disability reframes the conversation. It is not the individual's difference that disables them, but rather the barriers of their environment. Imagine if tools like assistive technology were made standard for everyone. Captioned and TalkType are perfect examples of tools that have the power to improve productivity for everyone, whilst also levelling the playing field for neurodivergent employees. Captioned is a live captioning note-taking software trusted by more than 30,000 professionals. It's designed to transform the way that you work and study. It can help employees to thrive in the workplace with company-wide benefits like increased employee performance, improved employee retention, and enhanced employee well-being. TalkType is a highly accurate lightning-fast dictation software which is available on all platforms including Windows, Mac, Chromebook, and mobile. Stanford research found that dictation is 3 times faster than typing. Talk about increased productivity for all. Dictation software also provides autonomy to anyone who cannot type using a traditional keyboard. If you want to know more about either of CareScribe's products, please book a personalised demo in the description or take a peek at the website that, again, I've hopefully remembered to link in the bio. Now, I want to share with you a phrase from Jess's session that changed my entire perception, and it is genuinely possibly the single most impactful phrase that I have ever heard.
And there's a brilliant phrase that I heard recently relating to neuroinclusive design of physical spaces, but I think it relates to everything. And it says, if you design for the needs of the extreme, you meet the needs of the mean. But if you design for the needs of the mean, you don't meet the needs of the extreme. So what we've done historically is we've just designed with that neuromajority in mind. So we haven't been able to support everybody. But if you start to design with everybody in mind, the extremes in mind, which by the way, I have a little bit of an issue with the term extremes, but I won't go on to that. You meet the needs of everybody, because a lot of these ways of working, and I think I saw it pop up in the chat actually as the video was going, would work for so many people. If you start to put things in place that work for neurodivergent people, it has a positive impact on everybody.
So with that in mind, and considering the social model of disability, let's focus on changing environments and not people. I'm going to play a little game with you, so please join in if you can. I want you to close your eyes and imagine a building with a ramp to the main door. Everyone can access your building using the ramp. It doesn't hinder anyone to have to go up or down that ramp. However, let's replace that ramp with some steps. What happens? Not everyone can get into your building now, can they? Wheelchair users now need to find another way in, or they need to be singled out and draw attention to themselves for additional support. What about someone pushing a pram or carrying something really heavy? Inclusivity isn't all about neuroinclusion. What about the door to your building? What's that like? Is it an automatic door? Because if not, then there's another unnecessary challenge. What if the person approaching your building has a physical disability, which makes opening the door more difficult than it needs to be? Honestly, the power of Jess's words in the webinar in that moment were just eye-opening for me. Jess went on to elaborate how we can use this concept to rethink workplace design. In workplaces, designing for the extremes with quiet spaces or flexible workstations, that we've already mentioned that these changes can benefit everyone and not just your neurodivergent employees. But to achieve this, we need to rethink traditional social norms and challenge the idea that one size fits all.
It's critical that we start to address, abandon, challenge these social norms that exist, that really we need to reframe as neurotypical social norms, because they're not necessarily norms for everybody. And it's not that the neurotypical way is right and the neurodivergent way is wrong. It's just that it's all different. And so some of these things, for example, are around eye contact. For a lot of autistic people, eye contact is very, very difficult, painful even. I know somebody who said that, they see faces in so many different pieces that when they're looking at a face, they're trying to piece all of that together and it's physically painful for them. So why would we force somebody to make eye contact just because we perceive that to be a demonstration of politeness or confidence, when really it doesn't matter? And I think not only do we need to kind of remove these social norms from our society, unfortunately, that is almost impossible, at least in the short term. But what we can do as individuals is perhaps challenge other people when we notice they may be judging or considering things from a social norm perspective. Because if you're someone who's experiencing that sort of misunderstanding of what's happening in this kind of social environment, it's not that you're wrong, it's just that people don't understand you as much as they understand them.
Let's talk a little bit more about those neurotypical social norms, the unwritten rules that we are all just supposed to follow. Things like mannerisms during a conversation and sitting still during a meeting, or even engaging in small talk about last night's dinner. For most neurotypical people, these norms seem harmless, but for some that is not the case. Take eye contact, again, for example. For some people with autism, making eye contact can be overwhelming or physically painful. In many workplaces, it is still seen as a sign of respect, and it's even expected. Think about an open plan office. They're super great for collaboration, right? Unless you are someone with a sensory sensitivity, in which case it would be like trying to work from the middle of a festival. Many of these norms then become exclusionary. We're really ramping up those feelings of isolation and anxiety, and we're massively increasing the risk of burnout for those who cannot comfortably conform. Exactly as Jess said, that's why organisations need to challenge and abandon these assumptions and reimagine what inclusivity looks like. Here's the key. Creating a truly neuro-inclusive workplace has to come from the top. Decision makers have the power to set the tone for how neurodiversity and disabilities are treated. When leaders prioritise inclusivity, it trickles down through the entire organisation. If you are looking for actionable ways to build a more inclusive workplace, please go and have a look at some of the other skill session webinars. We've got how to create a neuro-inclusive workplace or how to get leadership on board with neuroinclusion. Those webinars are on our website, and you will get more practical strategies for reshaping workplace culture to benefit everyone. Now, let's revisit Jess's thoughts on why a strength-based approach is so powerful.
The other thing I think is vital is that we adopt a strengths-based approach. So within the workplace, if you're lucky enough that someone shares with you that they're neurodivergent, you don't want to immediately say, oh gosh, that must be awful. How is that difficult for you at work? What challenges does that present for you? Whilst you might be coming from a really good place, you've immediately made it a negative. You've kind of reconfirmed for them this negative connotation that exists for neurodivergent people. What's much better is to lead with strengths. First of all, thank them for telling you. Oh, thanks so much for telling me that. I really appreciate it. If you're comfortable, I'd really love to understand a little bit more about that. Let's start with what positives does that bring for you as a neurodivergent person in the workplace? Because bringing out those strengths, which neurodivergent people have, is really important to boost confidence and self-esteem and make people realise that you are a safe person and you are far more positive than, unfortunately, the majority of society when it comes to neurodivergence.
As we near the end of this episode, I want to play another quick game. Think about yourself or a friend or a colleague that you know is neurodivergent. What strengths do they have that a neurotypical person might not? Maybe they're incredibly detail orientated, or they can hyperfixate on tasks that others find tedious. Maybe they are incredible with numbers, or they are very, very creative. Perhaps their talks too much energy is actually just an amazing talent for brainstorming. Maybe their gets easily distracted tendency means that they are quick to notice opportunities that others might have overlooked. Imagine how much more positive our mental health could be if we framed these traits not as flaws, but instead as assets. I don't know if you are getting what I'm trying to say, and I want you to think of a description of someone and start to test out another way to describe their negative things that you've got. I'm going to give you an example. So, hello, I'm Hayley. I overthink absolutely everything because my anxiety is through the roof most of the time. Sorry, I've always been told that I talk too much when I get comfortable, and I'm a little bit chaotic because I get distracted really easily. But in meetings, for example, I don't actually talk at all because I don't think that what I have to say adds much value. And your idea is probably going to be better than mine, so I might as well just keep my thoughts to myself. Well, if that's my narrative, then no wonder my mental health is a little bit fragile. What if I tried this instead? Does this sound more positive? Hello, I'm Hayley. I'm super organised and I'm always curious. You'll usually find me exploring different outcomes for situations and scenarios to ensure that we know what to expect regardless of possible factors. With structure, I love to work collaboratively and autonomously. This allows me to prioritise my workload between the tasks that require my full attention and build relationships through effective communication. I'm an empath, which means that my best trait is my ability to see things from other people's point of view. I will always try to support my colleagues where I can, but do let me know if you need a hand. Neurodivergence is not about deficits. It's about differences. And when we embrace those differences, we open the door to innovation, empathy, and stronger teams. Jess's insights combined with our own reflections show us that workplaces can and should be places that everyone thrives. I'm going to end with the same piece of advice that Jess did in her webinar. Have a listen.
But if you take one takeaway from today, I'd like it to be this. I have a bit of an issue with the term empathy because I think, especially not with the term, but with the focus on empathy, because I think we can never truly empathize with everybody. How can we possibly truly understand what everybody else is experiencing when we don't live our lives through in their shoes? But what we can do is we can listen to them. And what we can do is we can believe what they're saying to us, whether we understand it or not. So I really encourage everybody to listen to neurodivergent people when they're telling you about their experience. And whether you get it or not, Believe what they're saying to you, whether you can change it or not, whether you can offer them the support that they need. Validating their feelings and validating their experiences can be so incredibly powerful.
And with that, we are at the end. A perfect place to finish this episode, and a time for a really cheesy goodbye that I'm not going to get any better at. Thank you for joining me in this episode of the Skill Sessions Pod. I will see you again next month. Remember that you can check out all of our Skill Session webinars in full in the description. And if you found today interesting, please tell your colleagues, your managers, your friends all about the Skill Sessions Pod. Don't forget to subscribe. I have been Hayley, and this has been the Skill Sessions Pod. I will see you again really soon. Thank you. Goodbye.